Hello, fellow Earthlings. Miss Spockirks. Welcome to Miss Spockirk's spiritual vlog. This, I will have to say, would be my last of the pandemic series that I had started a little over a year ago. So, the beginning of this year, I had done, a lot about, I reflected about how my spiritual journey came about. And incidentally, it's the perfect day to kind of conclude this whole series because today is not just Halloween, but it's actually the 23rd anniversary of my coming to America. It was definitely not something that I'd planned for, like I had talked about in my previous vlogs. And so it was really God's plan that unfolded for me, probably to get me into that spiritual realm that I probably might have not achieved otherwise. It's the sum total of my experience, my spiritual foundation that helped me get to where I am right now. So, post the awakening, I had like the last 2 months were just the 7 year periods I was talking about. It was more of, what happened, how did knowing Christ, surrendering to Christ shape up my life? And it was brilliant. I've had ups and downs, but it worked great. And I could see how useful and meaningful life is because of that spiritual connection. And this, quite frankly, is really the start of the third 7 year period, or the first 2 years of it, really. But I'm still going to conclude it because this whole series really started with this pandemic coming into being. And so that's really what made me kind of do these vlogs. It was my expression, my reflections, my way to handle what was thrown, which was unprecedented across the globe. So I would say, at the tail end of the second 7 year period seemed awesome. I would not have imagined in the slightest that life was going to be so different the next 2 years. I had completed 4 international trips. I'm a travel junkie, and that makes me smile, seeing new places, meeting new people. My 25th country was Cuba, which I'm glad I was able to do when the murmurs of the pandemic was just about buzzing. So given light of all of that and the fact that today is the 31st, which is my 23rd anniversary of coming to America, I figured it was a good way to sort of like tie it all up and kind of close out my pandemic reflections, if you will. So the height of those travel ecstasy, I had no idea because it was, from August of 2019 through January of 2020, done tons of traveling, did a lot of stuff. Life was going about as normal. There was murmurs of a virus popping up in China, but it seems so far away. I mean, in this millennium, I think we've had several viruses come out of Asia, but not really get devastating. Didn't even break into epidemics, to that matter. And so I was, it was just too distant. And then suddenly February approaches and Italy is taken down by the virus. And that really changed my perspective about this whole thing. And I was like, okay, this is something more serious. Now, as people were grappling with all of this, you're making small adjustments. I remember this pandemic really tested my spiritual strength. I had gained the awakening about 14 years prior, and one would think I was well prepared for it, but I was quite surprised at how unprepared we can still be, even with our best intentions and best preparations. So it came about so suddenly. I was at work and there was murmurs about it, and then suddenly we all had to work remote, and the office where I worked is really the state office. So the governor was giving press conferences. Italy's cases were going ridiculously high. People weren't sure. And then I found a startling thing that at the beginning of the pandemic that I never expected I would go through. I did not ever imagine going through a mild panic attack. And I did do so at the beginning of April. And it was largely, I think, not as much as, it was just the noise and the hysteria created by social media, which makes me really sad because my whole coming to America was because of what I'd chosen as my major in school, which was computer science, and internet was my playground. I remember being an undergrad and, being able to see this awesome new medium of communication, and it was brilliant. It was still static pages. We hadn't gotten to dynamic. But when I came to America, I was one of the early adopters of the internet because I actually did e-commerce. I was able to buy flight tickets online when people barely knew what it meant or barely knew how to spell internet for that matter. And then suddenly in 2007, with the advent of the smartphones, it now became ubiquitous to everybody. So it seemed like a great blessing because it was a great way to communicate, connect the world. We were global in the true sense. And then I saw what damage this could do as well. Because social media, when I was in the early days of my coding and my work experience as an IT professional, a programmer, and then to a manager, is that it was by you got invited to LinkedIn or Facebook through invitation. So it was a very select group, and then suddenly everybody was allowed. Unfortunately, techies, we don't really think about futuristic expectation. We're just so happy about a new toy that we've gotten that you don't think about the guardrails that you need to do, because not everybody is gifted in the same way to perceive these spectacular technological advancements. And we paid the price for that. The pandemic, the starts of it, before it even became a pandemic, you could see how the social media hysteria was just making it awful. So I went from this high of spiritual growth and being able to live life, enjoy it fully while being under the purview of what it is to be a Christian, what it is to know Christ. And it was brilliant. And then I feel like the rug was pulled under from me. And so that mild panic attack happened because there were things that I could see was true, and there was so much noise, so much confusion. The diatribe around became political. It was a healthcare crisis. And I was like, why is it so hard for people to come to agreement on the best possible solution as a whole? And then it was selfishness. People were so selfish that they refused to try to work together to help solve this problem. And so, and a lot of people, and one of the things that did happen was a lot of negative, chats, communication with people. I cut off from people because it was just so annoying. And also the media, I turned it off because it was depressing, because I predicted what would happen in Italy would happen here if we didn't pay attention. Guess what? It happened. New York saw the worst of what happened in the beginning of the pandemic. And then it just spread. Then we saw throughout the world. And then travel got hampered. So it was a crazy, and so I was grappling, having that spiritual base. Suddenly I found my foundation sort of rocky. And partly it was, I guess, there was a fear which I had never really experienced before. I don't know if it was as much as about death or the fact that I won't have any family around me when it happens, because nobody knew who was getting infected, why some of them were dying, why some weren't. And so there was a lot of chaos in that moment that my brain just didn't know how to handle it. And I think that's what triggered that mild panic attack. And then I realized, okay, I need to take stock of myself. And I think that's where knowing Christ, knowing that, He's watching over you, kind of helped me get out of that really dark hole, if you will. And I learned to pray for two things. One was wisdom, because I couldn't understand why people were so foolish, and it was frustrating me, and I had to get out of being frustrated because that feeds into other negative emotions. And courage, because I realized, okay, at this point, it is what it is. I'm not traveling. I'm kind of stuck. I have experienced, I had to be in isolation. So I just have to trust that God's hand is there watching over me. He's going to protect me, He's going to take care of me. And that was the beginning of change. That's what kind of triggered me to start these spiritual reflections, because it helped me get to a better place. Instead of being watching and listening to social media that only feeds negativity, it was a way for me to get out of that, see the bigger picture. Don't know why the pandemic happened. Some Christians are like, oh, it's the end of times. And maybe not, I don't know. But the thing I find is some folks get into these various sort of obsessions. So with the pandemic, there were the people who got really scared, don't do stuff. And then you have the people who are like ostriches, bury their head in the sand, and they do not want to agree that there is a problem going on, and they keep blaming everybody else. And the others just, I don't know, they just want to gain something. And so there's like wickedness and evil that also perpetrated. So I found a lot of this coming in the social media with people that I have known for years, that their perspectives were very different. So it really made me step back, kind of reflect where my roots are, where my grounding is, so that I'm not distracted by the noise of what's around me. That was where this spiritual beginning, or the reawakening of the reflections really started in earnest. I realized, I accepted that, like, just based on how things were transpiring, I have predicted how this pandemic would unfold, and I have been on the money. I expected a second wave last October, which also was an extremely painful period for me between, though the pandemic, like in terms of the virus, did not affect me directly as in sickness, but the effects that it caused in the world around me impacted me. I had an accident. I had power outages. My mom and there was family. I mean, they were away from me that I really couldn't be around if something was going on. So all these tensions really made October of last year a really tough month. But I pulled through all of this because of Christ's watchful hands. He was there and in spirit. So this is the verse that sort of I was reading yesterday, which I do my daily readings. John chapter 14, verse 17. It really spoke to me. The Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. But you know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. That sort of was the courage that I got as I overcame that first hurdle of the mild panic in the pandemic and getting through all the struggles. It just kept me positive. And I actually experienced total physical isolation from people for basically about 250 days of all of 2020 into early 2021. And a lot of my friends, they were like, how did you manage that? Because a lot of people were getting claustrophobic. They were getting boxed in. I actually relished that moment of solitude. I found my space. I found ways to engage spiritually that helped me navigate through these dark and difficult times. So the third 7-year period has started off rather with an enormous test. I'm happy at this point. I'm at a place where I feel sort of content, where the world is not normal yet, and I know it. I haven't been able to travel, and it kind of makes me sad because I love traveling. But I'm also aware that whatever is transpiring, God is in control. It's unfortunate that so many lives have been lost. It was not needed, but that's because people don't understand, how to choose between what is right and what is easy. Oftentimes, it's human nature to choose the path of least resistance, and sometimes it may not always be the right place to be. A lot of selfishness came out of this pandemic, and there was a lot of good too, but the reason the pandemic became the pandemic was because of selfishness, the unwillingness and self-denial of reality, and living in alternate universe. Figuring if you say that, it would go away, but it hasn't. Anybody saying that is kidding themselves. So another thing that helped me through, apart from the spiritual reflections, is I started reading. I avoided social news media for the most part. I even stopped the Wall Street Journal last year because they can't give me any good news. I'm back to subscribing now because I feel we're in a little better place. The other thing that really got to me to keep me afloat in this last couple months has been Harry Potter. I've just finished the book 7 for the second time in the last 3 months. I had these books, I own them. I've had them since my 20s. When I read it back then, you never thought about the deep meaning. It amazed me when I read it the second time. I started finding social metaphors that are brilliant. And it's built in a fantasy world, but they're very real. And one of the things that really stuck with me in light of how people have perceived the information in the pandemic, how the social media has brought itself out, was this quote that I read from the book, which was pretty similar to what, your spiritual growth can be as well. Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure. And how true is that? Because everybody thinks they have knowledge, but knowledge is just a collection of information. It takes wisdom to know how to use knowledge and apply it to make life better for yourself and the world around you. And that's exactly what that quote sort of relates. And so to me, when I take it into the Christian context, wisdom is sort of the amalgamation of the head and the heart. So your spirit is really guiding that wisdom to amalgamate those two things, because your head thinks practical stuff. Your heart empathizes with other people. And basis of Christianity is that, because Jesus only had 2 commandments for us. Love God above everything else, which means you don't love money, you need to think God first. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's empathy. Feeling for other people's pain so that you're not caught up in your selfish desires and your self-interests. So they kind of tied in, and so I've really enjoyed these books. I finished it the second time around this year, and I can see it speaking volumes. And I think people need to understand that. And I know there are a group of people, when they see all of the happenings around the world, that, end of times. So my question to them is this: so what? If it's the end of times, why does it matter when? It's bound to happen, because evil cannot last forever. It will have to end. So everything that's evil in the world will have to die out at some point. And that sort of is what people are earning for that end of times. But rather than worrying about the date and getting into theories and conspiracies around it, why don't you just follow what Jesus told you about it? Be prepared. Because regardless of when it happens, you need to be prepared. Are you prepared? That's a question only you can ask to yourself, and only you can answer. Nobody can force you to do anything. At the end of the day, it's between you and God. And if you are prepared, you have nothing to worry about the end of times as well. So as this storm passes through, if people understand the true spirit and know how life is supposed to be, and understand not everything is in your control, and it's okay, give it to God, you will sail through it. And I'm happy to say the first 2 brutal years of my third 7-year period, as I've been able to navigate and get through with it. And I'm happy about that. I don't know where this period would end, because the end of this 7-year period would be on a milestone birthday for me. Will the world still be there then? I don't know, but to me, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, if my heart is connected with Christ, and then it's up to him. When he sees fit, that's when I'll go see him. And until that time, I will do what I have to do on this earth in the humblest possible way that I can do, and with the wisdom that he has blessed me with, so that I can make sure I can make other lives better, and not just mine. With that, I'd like to bid adieu. It was good having these reflections, and I hope it helped you all. Thank you.